The strategic crisis that led to the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union collided in what is widely regarded as the largest single battle in human history. The Battle of Kursk. Millions of soldiers, tens of thousands of artillery pieces, and nearly every type of armored vehicle available at the time were thrown into a single, massive confrontation that would decide the future of the Eastern Front. Germany's leadership believed this battle offered a final opportunity to regain strategic initiative after the catastrophe at Stalin. Although new historical research has shown that Soviet casualties were extraordinarily high, often several times greater than German losses, the outcome of Kursk was nevertheless a decisive German defeat. Understanding why requires examining the broader strategic crisis facing Germany in early 1943. At this moment, Adolf Hitler and his generals were confronting an unprecedented situation. The German Sixth Army had been annihilated at Stalingrad. Allied bombers were devastating German cities. Axis forces in North Africa had surrendered, and the Battle of the Atlantic was slowly turning against German U-boats. Germany was now fighting a global multi-front war with shrinking resources and declining manpower. Hitler understood that Germany could not defeat the Soviet Union while simultaneously defending Western Europe and the Mediterranean. As a result, he initially favored a cautious approach on the Eastern Front, hoping to avoid major risks and conduct only limited operations. His strategic objective was not immediate conquest but attrition bleeding the Red Army so severely that it would be incapable of launching major offensives in 1943. This concern was well-founded, as Soviet numerical superiority was overwhelming. By spring 1943, the Red Army outnumbered the Wehrmacht more than 2-to-1 in manpower, nearly 5-to-1 in tanks, and 3-to-1 in artillery. Despite catastrophic losses in 1941 and 1942, the Soviet Union had not only recovered but was planning ambitious operations aimed at destroying German Army Group Center and Army Group South. If successful, these offensives could have opened the road to Eastern Europe and possibly ended the war by 1944. Thus Kursk became the focal point of both German anxiety and Soviet ambition, a battlefield where each side believed the future of the war would be decided. Soviet defensive mastery and strategic patience while German leaders hesitated and debated. The Soviet high command, known as Stavko, prepared with ruthless efficiency. Expecting a German attack against the exposed Kursk salient, the Soviets deployed enormous forces under commanders such as Konstantin Rokossovsky and Nikolai Vykhtadin, supported by a massive strategic reserve commanded by Ivan Konev. Soviet engineers transformed the Kursk region into a defensive fortress on a scale never before seen. Over 9,000 kilometers of trenches were dug, layered into multiple defensive belts, reinforced with 1 million mines, and supported by thousands of artillery pieces. Civilian labor, primarily women, played a crucial role in constructing these defenses, underscoring the total war nature of the Soviet effort. Inside these defensive zones, the Red Army developed sophisticated anti-tank strongpoints, combining infantry, engineers, artillery, and armor into tightly coordinated killing zones. The Soviets also learned quickly from intelligence and battlefield experience. Captured German Tiger tanks were studied extensively, revealing weaknesses that Soviet crews were trained to exploit. While many Soviet commanders initially favored preemptive attacks, Joseph Stalin was ultimately persuaded by Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky to adopt a defensive strategy. Their logic was clear: allow the Germans to attack, exhaust their elite armored forces, and then unleash massive counteroffensives. Artillery became the backbone of Soviet defense, with concentrations reaching up to 70 guns per kilometer in some sectors. Behind German lines, partisan warfare further strained German logistics, destroying railways, locomotives, and supply depots. At the same time, the Soviets prepared two massive counteroffensive plans: Operation Kutuzov and Operation Polkovodets Rumiantsev, designed to destroy German forces once the initial assault stalled. By mid-1943, the Red Army was not merely defending, it was deliberately setting a trap, confident that time and industrial strength were on its side. German delays, miscalculations, and Operation Citadel. The German decision to attack at Kursk, named Operation Citadel, was plagued by delay and indecision. Hitler originally favored operations in southern Ukraine to secure critical industrial resources, but his generals convinced him that crushing Soviet forces at Kursk offered a chance to restore strategic momentum. However, constant postponements allowed the Soviets to strengthen their defenses even further. Commanders like Erich von Manstein warned that delay favored the enemy, yet political and strategic anxieties repeatedly stalled the offensive. Weather conditions, Allied victories in North Africa, fears of an invasion in Italy or Greece, and internal disagreements all contributed to hesitation. By the time the attack was finally launched on July 5, 1943, German forces faced an enemy far stronger than anticipated. Although the Wehrmacht assembled nearly 900,000 men and thousands of tanks, the Red Army could deploy nearly 3 times that number in total reserves. German intelligence severely underestimated Soviet strength and overestimated its own ability to achieve a rapid breakthrough. When the offensive began, German forces initially penetrated the 1st and 2nd Soviet defensive belts, shocking Soviet commanders. Yet progress slowed dramatically as German units encountered dense minefields, relentless artillery fire, and increasingly effective Soviet anti-tank tactics. Coordination problems between German armor and infantry further undermined momentum. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army stalled against heavily fortified positions. In the south, German armored spearheads advanced farther, but failed to achieve encirclement. Despite tactical successes and high Soviet losses, the Germans lacked the reserves and logistical capacity to exploit breakthroughs. Operation Citadel was conceived as a decisive blow but executed as a grinding struggle against an enemy prepared in depth, one that Germany could not afford to sustain. Prokhorovka and the myth of tactical victory. The clash near Prokhorovka on July 12, 1943, became one of the most famous episodes of the battle and one of the most mythologized. Soviet forces launched a massive counterattack involving the 5th Guards Tank Army in an attempt to smash German armored spearheads. The resulting engagement was chaotic, brutal, and devastating, particularly for the Soviets. German heavy tanks and disciplined defensive tactics inflicted catastrophic losses on attacking Soviet formations. Hundreds of Soviet tanks were destroyed in a single day, while German losses remained relatively low and largely recoverable. For decades, Soviet historiography portrayed Prokhorovka as a heroic victory. But modern research reveals a far more complex and painful reality. Tactically, German forces held their ground and inflicted disproportionate casualties. Strategically, however, Prokhorovka changed little. The Germans lacked the strength to resume offensive operations, while the Soviets, despite severe losses, retained overwhelming reserves. Elsewhere, on the front, the situation worsened for Germany. On the same day as Prokhorovka, the Red Army launched Operation Kutuzov against the Oriol salient, forcing German commanders to divert critical units. Hitler's decision to halt Operation Citadel was influenced less by Allied landings in Sicily than by the growing realization that German forces were exhausted and overextended. Prokhorovka thus stands as a paradox, a tactical German success that masked an irreversible strategic defeat. The Red Army could absorb losses that Germany could not, and this imbalance would ultimately decide the battle. Soviet counteroffensives and the collapse of German positions with Operation Citadel effectively neutralized. The Red Army seized the initiative. Operation Kutuzov crushed German defenses around Oriol, forcing a general withdrawal and sealing the fate of the northern German forces. In the south, Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev unleashed overwhelming force against weakened German units defending Kharkov. Millions of Soviet troops, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft, surged forward, breaking German lines and threatening German commanders scrambled to stabilize the front, redeploying divisions from other sectors and even weakening the defense of key cities. Despite fierce resistance, German forces were steadily pushed back. The liberation of Belgorod and Oriol marked a psychological turning point, celebrated in Moscow with massive artillery salutes. By late August, Kharkov was abandoned to avoid another catastrophic encirclement. The battle, which had raged for nearly 2 months, ended with a clear Soviet victory. Although Soviet losses were staggering, likely exceeding 1 million casualties, the Red Army had achieved its primary objective, breaking German offensive capability on the Eastern Front. Germany, by contrast, could no longer replace its losses in men, tanks, or aircraft. Kursk marked the last time the Wehrmacht launched a major strategic offensive in the East. From this point forward, Germany would remain permanently on the defensive. Kursk, as a turning point in World War II, the Battle of Kursk was not merely the largest battle of World War II, it was one of the most consequential. Despite inflicting heavy casualties, Germany failed to achieve any of its strategic objectives. The Red Army emerged, battered but victorious, seizing the initiative for the remainder of the war. German morale, both at the front and at home, declined sharply. Faith in eventual victory over the Soviet Union evaporated. The defeat also had profound consequences for civilians under German occupation, as retreating German forces adopted increasingly brutal policies. Militarily, Kursk demonstrated the effectiveness of deep defense, combined arms warfare, and industrial endurance. Politically and psychologically, it shattered the myth of German invincibility. From Kursk onward, the Red Army advanced relentlessly westward, covering more than 1,000 miles until reaching Berlin in 1945. In this sense, Kursk was a true turning point, not only in military terms but in shaping the brutal final phase of the war in Europe. It proved that industrial power, strategic patience, and the ability to absorb losses could outweigh tactical brilliance. The echoes of Kursk would be felt in every major operation that followed, making it one of the defining battles of the 20th century.